Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the next project at the lighter side of RC. With the A10, the Skymaster Black Snakes complete, it is time to move on to our next projects. We've got a couple starting at the same time. So this is a Skymaster PC-21. We did the unboxing of this aircraft probably about 8 months ago, and it's time to finally put it together. I know many of you have been waiting for this, so hang tight and we will start the build of the Skymaster PC-21. All right guys, so generally when I first start a build, the first thing we do is cover all the equipment. So we've got a Jetcat turbine going in this aircraft, and I forget exactly what the model is. I think it's called the SP10. Anyways, it's the 100 Newton turbine. Obviously this is all the stuff that goes with it, and it is going to be a lot of power for this aircraft. It's going to be very, very impressive. SP100RX, and there she is. Hefty piece for sure, and it's going to be a lot of engine for this aircraft, but it seems to be the norm right now as far as what is being installed. All right, so one of the big changes we're making on the aircraft is we are going with Aileron ER50s. Now, there's not like a standard set. What I did is did a bit of research, contacted Aileron, and they said that this is the set that other people have purchased, but they never heard back whether it was correct or not. So we will be using the Aileron retracts, but we'll be using the Skymaster legs. And what that's going to do is eliminate the need for air, and we're going to be switching the doors out to servo-operated doors. So these are a little bit different because our leg needs to fit inside the main trunnions, which you can see here is what it's designed for, so that's how we ordered it. And then the front one is a pin mount, and it looks to be the 8mm pin, and of course we've got a servo mounted on the actual gear itself. So that's the setup that we're using, and then we've got the GS200 controller, which is the nice controller. So that is the gear that we'll be installing. Probably going to be the biggest challenge because obviously we're taking out the Skymaster Air, using different retracts that fit different. All right, next kind of fun thing we have is two Warbird pilots. These are the quarter scale ones, and they both have servo-operated heads, which is going to be real slick in that aircraft. All right, and as far as the brains of the aircraft, we'll be running it on a Jetty DS24. We'll be using the Central Box 220, and we will be using a Rex 12 as our primary receiver. We'll have a 900 megahertz backup, and we'll probably have another receiver set up in clone mode. So that's what we're going to be using to operate the aircraft. Tank-wise, we've got the stock tanks. I've been chatting with Carlos at CM Jets, best tanks out there, and he's working on a set for this aircraft, so we'll see how that all works out. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what we're putting in this aircraft, and it's going to be a real fun plane. Looking forward to this thing, looking forward to flying this thing. I'll be doing the maiden on it as well too, and quite excited for that. It'll be a next year maiden, but building this thing is going to be amazing. Now, as far as protective bags go, we've got the entire Revic set for this aircraft. So we've got the wings, we've got all the rear surfaces, the vertical and horizontal stabs, plus we've got a fuselage bag as well too, which is absolutely outstanding. And really happy with this kit because it came with the wing drop tanks, which is also going to look awesome. So as per usual, guys, I've printed off the manual for the PC-21. The manuals from Skymaster are so-so, but we'll be kind of going through this and using this for reference purposes as well too. We probably won't be following the manual like normal, But one of the first things that we need to work on is the landing gear. Now the reason I want to work on the landing gear first is I want to make sure that it's going to fit first of all, and if we need to order anything, then we can order something alternative or figure it out and get that rolling so we're not waiting on that part later on. So first thing we're going to work on is the gear. So this is going to be a little bit sporadic, a little bit different than the manual. The manual starts off with the wings, which is fine. So we'll start off with the wings, main gear on the wings, and we'll also do the nose gear as well too. But as a first step, before we can do any of that stuff, we need to get our area organized. So we're going to lay all of our parts out here on the table. And what we need to do is we need to plug in all of our stuff, right? We need to update our Jetty products, so our central box, our Rex, and our 900 megahertz. We'll get all those updated on the computer. We'll start a new model, and we will start with some programming items on the Jetty radio. All right, so we've got the left wing on one of the workbenches here, and we are going to start pulling this gear out. Now, the root of the wing is not parallel to the center line of the fuselage. So to get our toe in, we can't measure off the root of the wing. Now, I'm going to make an assumption here that Skymaster has these set up properly. We don't know, but we're going to hope they do because the door is glued to the leg. So when this leg closes, the door needs to sit properly. So we're going to make some assumptions there. And what I've done to mark that is just taken some masking tape. It's a bit tough to show you the angle here, but just looking down the side of the door, I just paralleled it with the door itself. So now at least we've got a decent starting point to get the gear back in the aircraft. Now, if Skymaster did not add any toe in, or if they accidentally added toe out, we would have to be removing the gear door because this is already installed and you can see it's fixed, right? So anyways, we're taking out the gear at this point. It's just 4 Phillips screws. We've taken the hatch cover off already. So once the gear's out, we'll be able to take a look at it, measure it, see how it's going to compare to the Aileron, and see if we can actually even make it fit. All right, guys, so did a bunch of rough fitting yesterday, and this looks like it's going to work out absolutely awesome. Now, a couple things you got to change on the ER50. So number one, the retracts themselves, at least the way they came, is they were retracting the wrong direction. Very easy change. You just got to use some C-clip pliers, pull the little retaining rings out, pop the pin out, flip the trunnion around, and what that means is now when the gear retracts, it retracts this way. Okay, so that's the big change that needs to happen. Now there's a couple other little changes as far as dimensions go, but I have a few workarounds with it. So the first workaround, or the biggest concern I had, I'll try and show you here roughly, but the Aileron output shaft sits about 2 millimeters higher than the stock one. So this output shaft here is 2 millimeters lower than the Aileron. So what does that really equate to? Well, when the gear is sitting in the wing, this gear is sitting about 2 millimeters higher. It's very, very close, really doesn't affect anything. But the one thing I did is with this push down and kind of set in its home, I took the gear and I twisted it about, well, to make sure the leading edge here was nice and tight, warmed the door up a little bit, and on the back side, not the painted side, so just used my heat gun, doesn't take much, and just folded it in so our leading edge touches. That's all I needed to do to make this gear work, and otherwise it's going to work out absolutely awesome, which is super exciting. I was actually expecting a lot more struggle with this than we had. So this bolt here lines up perfectly. We're going to have to re-drill these ones because the holes don't line up between the gear, but that's basically it. The only other thing is there's a former like this inside there, and we needed to sand only a couple millimeters off of that former to allow the motor of the gear to sit against the wing. But that is it for changes. Really happy with that. So the main gear looks like it's going to work out very well. Now moving on to the front gear here, I'm expecting a little bit more work, but hopefully this all works out very similar. Shouldn't be too much of an issue. We got lots of clearance here. Probably the biggest struggle on the nose is going to be switching the doors from air to servo operated, which I've already got a plan in place for that, so I'll talk about that once we get into it. Okay, so the final consideration here is our trunnion length on the gear. Now we really have no options when it comes to this. The Skymaster trunnion is what it is. The Aileron trunnion is what it is. If we ended up maybe adding a collar or something here, it's just going to change the position of the gears when it retracts into the wing. Now this isn't even the actual amount, because if we line up our mounts like this, it gives you an idea of what we're looking at. Now we have some solutions to this. So we've got about, we'll call it 5 centimeters there, maybe a centimeter, I don't know, somewhere in that range. Doesn't really matter, the number doesn't matter. We've got some options here. So the Skymaster gear, the oleos that come with this, this kit are nice ones like all their other high-end kits. So we've got an air oil system. There's lots of compression in this PC gear, right? So when the plane's actually sitting, it's probably going to be very compressed like this. So we do have some options where we can have a little bit more air pressure to compensate, but I'm not so worried about the mains. The nose is going to be the biggest thing, and but fortunately we've got great oleos where we can compensate, and I don't think it's going to be an issue at all. So great gear choice for this kit, and Aileron, if you watch this, this is definitely the one that fits as far as the mains go. So next thing to do is finalize this gear. So I've got to get this put back in, and we've got to get our lines running, all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to kind of finalize my install here of the gear, and we'll go from there. All right, so we've got all of our Jetty Box stuff updated, and we've got a basic model going on here. And let's take a look and see what we've got for our model. So all of our outputs are already set up. We've got our gear, which is number 9, brake, which is number 10, nose wheel, which is number 11. So we've got those channels already predefined and set up. So what we want to do is we want to go into the GS200 controller here. Now when you first plug this controller in, it's set up for input-output mode. So what I mean by that is you have a gear input, you have a brake input, you have a steering input, and that means you need to have 3 cables going in between your system that you're using into the GS200. We're going to set this up in bus mode. So we've got one output here, which is set up as an EX bus output, and that goes into the gear input. And then what we need to do is we need to have our channels defined here. So our gear channel, which is number 9. So we're going to change the gear channel to number 9. Brake channel, which is number 10. We're going to change our brake channel on the bus menu to number 10. Steering channel, number 11. So steering channel, number 11. So now we've got one cable feeding our central box to the GS200, and that sends all of our data and everything. Now when you do this, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but I think you have to put a patch lead in between the brake to the steering, because there'll be no voltage to the steering if it's set up this way. So, all right, so I didn't really do much. I just shut everything down, restarted it, and it was good to go. So now, you can see here our gear channel. You can see here our gear channel, gears up, gears down, and then our brake channel is 100% brake and brake off. Okay, so we're good there. So that is done, and that's basically all we really need to do at this point. Is we're set up there for our bus system. So now what this allows us to do is we can plug in this gear into the controller. With the ER50s, you use a 2-cell LiPo, which we've got. So we're in the gear down position. Gear up. So this is operating backwards right now. So because we reverse the trunnion, we have to reverse the polarity on the controller. So now when I go to gear down, it gives it the correct command. Not scary stuff at all, it's just because this is reversed, this needs to be reversed. That's it. So now we've got control of our gear and we can finalize the setup in the swing.
Gear down.
All right, so a couple things to think about as we move into the wings here. Number one, we've got 3 separate factory installed lights on the wing. So we've got 3 leads here, we've got a plug and all that stuff. So what we need to do is kind of figure out our wiring path. Now if you look here, you can see that there's a gap underneath the main wing spar or the wing tube. Sorry about the terminology. So what that means is we've got a path here as well too that can bring us out to this location. Now when the gear comes installed in the wing, you can see the tubes were coming out here, but that's not where we want them. We want everything to run to this point right here, which if we look at the wing, it's the hole that's in front of the wing tube. So if we take a look at the actual fuselage, we've got our wing tube here, we've got our blank space right there. Looking inside, we've got a nice space in the formwork right there to run our wires through. So that's going to be where we're going to put our wires through on the fuselage, is going to be right here in this location. So what I would generally do in this case is, number one, I want to get our path figured out, which it's pretty wide open. Once we get to this area, it's wide open. So first thing I'm going to do is get our light wires run to this location. And then while we're doing that, I'm also going to run some wires for our servos. Now what we're setting this up with on this aircraft is we are going to use an internal linkage for the flaps. The flaps have a nice big carbon hinge point and stuff. They come down like this. And they basically give you the option to either do the aileron as internally hinged or external. I'm not a huge fan of the internals in this particular situation because there's not a lot of mechanical advantage. So we're going to do our aileron servo linkage as external. So that's going to be coming out to this location. It's just going to be a better setup. And so that's kind of the plan for the wing. So I'm going to start getting those wires run, and then we will start working on our servos and gear and all that kind of stuff. All right, so we've got all the wires run. The path that I went to here is through the hole, kind of have to go into the leading edge of the wing and then tuck in right here behind the gear, and you can see we've come out. So I've got my 2 servo leads there. We've got just an extra string lead just in case. We've got our gear lead there, and all of our light leads are coming from the wingtip to this point here. So that's all done. So now with that done, we can get our gear installed. All right guys, and I talk about this in every build video, but you have to take your gear apart and you have to lock tight the gear. So every bolt on your gear, take it apart if it's metal to metal and Loctite it. So on this gear, we've got that one. I took the end piece out, and we did all the wheel bolts as well too. Now while we're here, what we'll do is we'll add a little bit of silicone lube to the brake system, and what that's going to do is that's going to prevent it from locking up. Now we do have control with this brake system because it will be the only thing that's powered by air, so we can just run a lower pressure on this and it's going to work fine as well too. But I like to lube my brake pads just to make sure that it's a smoother operation and we don't flat spot the wheels. These are also air-filled tires too, so we can fill those up once we get into the final setup of the aircraft. So almost ready to put this thing back together, and just going to put a couple drops in between all those different plates, and then we'll be able to put this gear inside the wing. Well, I've put the gear installed inside the wing. We've screwed it in. Use the wood screws that were supplied previously. I like wood screws on landing gear, and the reason I like wood screws is because if you have a serious issue, those screws will generally pull out before you know, anything else gets destroyed. So, but they're also very aggressive screws and they'll hold that in nicely. Okay guys, so we've got the gear installed here. I did the grub screws up on the other side. I just extended the leg, and we'll do these grub screws up on the inside as well. Now, because these are going into the aluminum leg, no reason to flat spot those. If you're using the standard pin setup with Aileron, yes, you should be flat spotting those, but we're not going to do that. So what we need to do is get those screws tightened up, and then we'll operate this leg and see how she looks. All right, so next thing we have to do is get the little cover piece here fit. Now, because of the different landing gear, we cannot install this with the existing cutout. You can see the difference there of how much extra we need to cut out. So we pretty much have to get rid of a huge part of that in order for that to work. And that's just purely based on the different gear design, right? So, so we'll trim that off, get that working, and then we'll have to route our brake line, which we've got to kind of go down and out and underneath and stuff. But gear on the left wing is all complete. I'll show you guys how this worked out. So we had to do our extra cutout there, which you can see, that's all screwed in. Other thing I did was extend the airline. So there wasn't enough airline to go the route that I was planning. So I switched the black out for the red because we got lots of excess red. So the other thing I did was added the spiral twist stuff right here on the brake line. And the point of that is for this, when the gear's going up and down, this doesn't wear out the brake line. And that goes all the way to the end there. And then we've got the brake line coming out of the former, going over here. We've got keepers everywhere. And then it comes out with the wire bundle. And then of course we'll just have one single connector going to the fuselage. So the gear on this wing is now complete. So as per usual, I like to do all the stuff on one wing, get everything figured out, everything sorted, everything done, and then what I do is I tackle the other wing. If you guys are familiar with my builds, that's what I do with pretty much every aircraft. I don't like having the wings sitting side by side and doing both wings at the same time. And that's just the way I work. So, okay, next thing we're going to work on is, I'll show you. All right, so we're going to start getting the servos installed, but we can't do the flap servo until we get the hinges and everything figured out. So actually, we may do those hinges first, and then we'll work on the aileron servos here while those hinges are curing. So I'll pull all the parts out, we'll take a look at that stuff, and we'll go from there. All right guys, so here is the flap setup. So we've got two different styles of linkage. That all comes in a single package, which is all this stuff here. And then we've got the covers as well too. So on the root of the wing, you've got the taller covers. On the further outboard portion, a little bit shorter. Same kind of shape, but just overall shorter. And there's matching covers to those as well too. So all we're going to do, the slots are already pre-done in this wing. So all we're going to do here is we are going to tape them off first of all. We're going to get high sol installed, and then what we'll do is we'll square them off. Overall, they're actually quite accurate, but there is, you can see here, some movement in those items. Now this is the only thing that we're really going to do to both wings at the same time. I just want to get this portion done and out of the way. So we're going to be using high sol 9462 to get this complete, and just going to glue them. They're going to take overnight to cure. Now one thing that we want to do when we do this is they've already put some holes in the carbon pieces, which is awesome, but you still want to roughen up the surface of the carbon fiber so you get even more grip on these pivots. So, okay, so we tape it off like that. I need to sand the horn. Doesn't take much. All you want to do is get the gloss off. And then we use trusty band screwdriver because trusty is definitely the best tool out there. If you guys don't know about trusty band screwdriver, #1 tool in the shop. Basically force a bunch of that high sol 9462 down into the slot. And once the slot is packed with a nice amount of 9462, then we take some more and we cover the horn. Now the goal here basically is to get those holes filled. So when that high sol cures, it's got solid pieces of epoxy going through those holes, which is a critical part of the holding power. So if these horns did not have those holes in there, it would be something that you'd use a drill bit and make sure that you added some holes going through. So push that all the way in, make sure the top lip and bottom lip, or front lip, back lip, are nice and seated, and we're solid all the way down. So then I just take my finger, and this is why I taped it, because it's just quicker, and run that across. And then once that's done, just pop the tape up. There we go. So that's how we get these horns installed. I'm not super worried about position right now. What I'll do once I get the other wing complete is we'll come back with that square and get them squared off. With the 9462, you've got lots of cure time with it as well. So that is one of the benefits of working with the material. So all I'm going to do now is just make sure that everything kind of lines up. Now we have to put this on the inboard side of the wing, and I'm just checking the alignment here, and it looks good. I think that's going to work out well. We're pretty much set as far as position goes. You don't have a lot of options with position, but we do have the option to adjust it now at this point if need be. So I'm just going to take some of this hardware, put it through there just to check and make sure that we've got enough clearance and operation works fine and all that stuff. We're going to have to be very gentle with it because we don't want to pull these hinges out. Okay, so all I've done here is I've used 2 small drill bits, and all I'm doing is making sure that everything kind of lines up the way it's supposed to. Okay, so this is kind of one of those finicky items that it's helpful to do at this point, because then you know that everything's going to line up properly. So right now I've zeroed out my aileron, and with the flap system sitting where it's supposed to go. So if I have those horns pushed down all the way, what happens is we've got a bigger gap in the space than I would like. So if I tuck that flap all the way in like this, it works out better. And what ends up happening there is we get a little bit of a gap right on this leading edge right there, but that allows everything to sit perfectly level. So I think I'm going to leave it like that. Because that makes everything work much nicer. And if we take these guys and push them back down, you can see exactly what happens is we have this gap open up a lot more. And I'm not a fan of that, so yeah, we'll just close that gap like that. So I'm happy with that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape off this flap surface. So some of the things I'm looking for here is I want this gap to be nice and tight versus having that sit out funny. And I also want this to be fairly level with the zeroed aileron. If I push these hinges down, what happens is that no longer is zeroed out, which in my mind is no good. So And then now, even if we give those hinges a bit of a push, they don't go anywhere. So that's what we're looking for when we do these flaps. Don't just glue those kind of things in and just think that everything's going to line up perfectly. You want to make sure that you're checking the alignment and checking those things. All right, guys, so I'll show you a little bit about what we're doing here for our aileron servo. Just get this servo out of here. Okay, so what I've done here is the travel that's recommended in the manual is 20 millimeters on the aileron. So if we go full deflection towards the underside of the wing, we're about 21, 22 millimeters of travel. So what it looks like what they've set up here is full deflection this way, which is opposite of the skin hinge, gives us our travel. So what I did was put that at its maximum downward travel, run a piece of masking tape across there, and then now we've got a location for our horn. So we're using the external horns, as I've mentioned. So what this allows me to do is to have a location that I don't want to exceed, bringing this horn towards the servo. So we're going to have that horn installed something like that, so that edge right there doesn't go past the tape, so ultimately we can get our full travel from that surface. So that's the horn set up here. We can't do the horn yet until we've got the servo installed, and then we draw our straight lines and all that kind of stuff to make sure our horn is in line with our servo. So next thing we had to do was take the Dremel and do a little bit of sanding on each of these tabs here, just to make sure that the servo, or allow room for the servo to fit in. So that's done. And then we got our servo set up and installed. So we're using a double clevis setup on this servo, and we're using a nice kind of a short servo arm, and I think this should work out good because we want to maximize our resolution on this servo, and it sticks up above the skin by about that much. So of course we'll have a clevis on this side. We've got the standard Skymaster aluminum L things installed, and we've got our servo cable bundled up. Now I talk about this on a regular basis. You don't want to use that servo cable to route your line into the wing. So if we put the servo in, ran the cable, we probably get somewhere about here. Well, what happens if you ever want to take that servo out and service it or switch it or whatever? You got no access to that lead. So you want your plug-in to come all the way to the servo outlet, so you could take this cover off, take the servo out, and you have access to the plug right there. That's why you want to bundle up your servo wires. So that's all done, and that servo is ready to install. Now we just need to put an end on this side, route that line to this opening, and the aileron servo will be ready to go. And I have marked out that cable. So when I put these cables through, I put a little Sharpie mark on there for one, and this one's got two, and just mark the ends, so when we put our connectors and everything on this side, we know which one's which. All right, so the tape's been pulled off the flaps, and the flaps worked out beautifully. So the actual travel here, as described in the manual, is 35 millimeters, and that travel is from that edge right there to the flap edge. So our actual travel at full flaps is about something like that, which is beautiful. So as described previously, we are going to do an internal linkage with the flaps. So we'll work on that over the next little bit here. Next thing we're going to do is going to get the aileron horn glued in. Now we're just, again, focusing on this one wing. We won't do the other wing until this one's complete. And I kind of already talked about our edge right there. So next thing I'll do is I'm going to put some tape down here, and we'll get our straight line drawn to give us our horn location where we're going to cut our slot into the aileron surface. Okay, so all I did was take a ruler, line it up with the back of the horn here, make sure we are in full contact with the horn, draw a Sharpie mark, and the width of the Sharpie mark kind of compensates for the width of the servo arm. So we're going to just put a slot in this location. And that slot is basically going to be wide enough to, we're going to have the horn like this. So that slot's going to be wide enough just to bring the front edge of that horn right here in line with the front edge of the tape. And then we'll use some high sol and glue it in. So what we're using to make that hole is, this is kind of my bit that I use to do this kind of stuff. It's usually a little bit wider than the actual carbon itself, which allows a bit of movement in the carbon to get everything lined up. So we'll get that hole done. All right, so we've got our slot cut there. Our horn is installed, glued in place. I took my 90-degree square, put it up there and made sure we're squared off. And the other thing we could do is we could also run a straight edge, but I'll do that when the high sol starts to cure off a little bit and stiffen up. And that'll just, right now it's soupy and soft, so it's easily bumped. Anyway, so that is the aileron surface. All right, guys, so that is going to be the end of this episode. I think we accomplished a decent amount on the PC-21. I feel like we did anyways. The first wing, just to summarize, is almost complete. The next thing we're going to be working on is the flap linkage in the next video. And once that wing is done, so the flap linkage is done, our flap horn covers, if that's what you want to call them, or fairings maybe, are installed. That wing will be finished, and we'll be completing the other wing, which we won't video like normal. And once the wings are done, then we'll start moving into the other surfaces like the horizontal stabs and vertical stabs. We'll get all the surfaces done, and then we'll start focusing on the install inside the aircraft. So looking forward to the rest of this build. I think it's going, fingers crossed, it's going off without a hitch, so it's not too bad. Oh, we've also got to do the nose gear as well too, so we'll be focusing on that in the next episode as well, and we'll get that wrapped up along with the wings. So if you guys have any questions about this build or anything else, make sure you either list them down below or feel free to reach out to me by email, thelightersideofrc@gmail.com. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, it's free to do so. Hit that subscribe button down below. Thanks for watching, guys, and we will see you in the next episode.